Both of you are involved in this project. What's the project about? What are your roles? And I might actually start with the private sector.
Okay, the project is really about trying to help farmers become professional business managers so that they treat their farms as businesses. And we cooperate in implementing the project with Swisscontact. On our side, we are involved in the training around agronomy and improving their farming practices, and also finding them a market for certified cocoa at a premium. And then on Swisscontact's side, I'll leave Manfred to respond.
Exactly, maybe your role.
His activities.
Yeah, the Sustainable Cocoa Production Program in Indonesia is a large public-private partnership. We are supported with the Swiss government as a public funding partner, and the private sector, including Barry Callebaut, Nestle, and all the brands you have around the year on your table when you eat chocolate. So we have the global big boys involved in this program, but we also work with the local industry together. So it's a large program, including 60,000 farmers in Indonesia, and we're targeting the 3 aspects of sustainability within this goal, within this program, which can only be achieved if we all work together, like we've seen the goal number 17 for the partnerships. The 3 aspects is clear for everyone in this room: people, profit, planet. If there is no profit along the supply chain, the value chain for everyone involved, there is no chocolate at the end of the day. So that's the reason in this program that we really on the ground are working together with the private sector for the technical support and the public sector for the backing up of Swisscontact as a neutral broker to make sure that all the people, the communities, local farming households are involved in the program.
So you're in it for profit, Mr. Debenham. What do you care about small farmers?
Well, in cocoa globally, 97% of cocoa is grown by smallholder farmers. And from our perspective, obviously, we want profit in the whole supply chain. We want everybody making a profit. And we need to help smallholder farmers to improve, particularly their planting material. So a farmer, on average, will grow around about 400, 450 kilos globally. So not just Indonesia, but in West Africa and the Americas. And if you do the calculations, that is not an acceptable livelihood. That is not an acceptable income. And we feel we have to transform that. And the business case for us is if we have good entrepreneurial farmers supplying us cocoa, then they will still want to grow cocoa. If they are not achieving a good livelihood out of growing cocoa, they will start growing something else, and then we will not have a business which makes chocolate. So there is a business case in it, and yes, it very much is about profit, but not just for us. It's very much about profit for the farmer.
Now you're saying what you're trying to do is get them to be more productive too. That's in your interest. It's in their interest too, if everybody makes a profit. But at the same time, you're making them more productive, and it's supposed to be sustainable. Are those compatible goals?
Yes, sure. The third aspect, the planet. We are also working on productivity with these farmers, includes also the environment. We have different training modules. We teach these farmers together with the private sector and especially also with the local government on productivity, good agriculture practice, but also on good environmental practices to care about their environment in terms of climate-smart agriculture. So we talk about zero deforestation within the program, no farming in protected forests, and responsible use of agro-inputs to make sure that we have a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within the program, and also an increase in carbon stock on the farms to help save the planet.
I mean, as you know, demand for cocoa goes up, follows GDP every year. What we don't want is for farmers to start growing cocoa on new land. We want them to grow more cocoa on existing land. Because in areas, for example, there's been a big growth of production in Ivory Coast, and a lot of that growth has been from forêt classée, from natural forests, where immigrant farmers have come in and started growing cocoa, and that is not a good solution. That is a bad solution. So what we're trying to encourage is existing tree stock of cocoa on existing farms is rehabilitated, and with improved planting material to generate higher productivity, which brings more cocoa, more income, solves the demand problem, but also prevents destruction of the rainforest.
You said the demand is huge, and indeed it is. I mean, just in Switzerland, apparently we eat 12 kilograms of chocolate a year, which if you imagine that is quite a lot, and you'd imagine we'd all be a lot fatter. But yeah, it's really quite a heap. But you said something else. You said you don't want the farmers to leave if they're making a terrible wage, you know, and they leave the farm and grow something else. But if you look at Barry Callebaut, you can say 240 million, I think, was your profit last year. Why don't you just pay them better prices and we're all set?
Yeah, that's...
Sorry about that.
The theory is good, but the practice is different, because what tends to happen is that as prices go up, consumption starts to fall, and then the reverse happens. Prices start to collapse. And what a farmer doesn't really want is volatility of price. They want predictability of price so that they can plan into the future. And a price variance of somewhere between 10 and 20% is nothing in comparison to an increase of production of 100%. So 100% increase in production gives a farmer $2,500 to $3,000 additional income a year, whereas a 20% increase in price is going to give a farmer perhaps $500 increase in income a year. So we tend to talk about income and not just price. And the approach is also not for us to encourage farmers to only plant cocoa, because we need to have resilient farmers who have a diversity of production to enable them to manage risk around things like cocoa prices and weather patterns and so on, and start to help them to become a lot more resilient to climate change. So we're trying to push farmers to literally, as I say, treating their farms as businesses and understanding what is the best way for them to get an optimal return from that business. And that business may not need to grow 100% of cocoa. It may need to grow some food crops, some other cash crops, some short-term crops, some long-term crops, and particularly, as in the case of our project with Swisscontact, timber. So much planting trees, indigenous trees, in the environments in which they live, to give them a long-term income potential as well as short-term income potential. So yes, we do pay premium prices for sustainable cocoa, but for us, when prices go up, historically, it is followed by a collapse, which then is historically again followed by a rise, which creates volatility, which then is very, very difficult for farmers to manage as a business.
Let's get someone into the discussion who is not involved in this project. It's Susanne Grossmann. You're not involved in this particular project, but you have a lot of experience because you're a member on the board of the Swiss Investment Fund for Emerging Markets. When you hear this, what are your thoughts on this project?
Well, I find it an extremely interesting and important project, not only because, I mean, let's remember 70% of the poor still live in rural areas and are dependent on the agricultural sector. So if we want to achieve one of these sustainability development goals, which is ending poverty, we have to put even more efforts into the agricultural space. But also, at the same time, agricultural land has, in the last years, increasingly become a target of very large private investors and sovereign investors. And that's a process which is, to one extent, not really perceived, I think, or consciously monitored, but at the same time, it's very uncontrolled. And I think this is why it's really important and good to see that the public sector and the private sector sit together, join forces to not only improve the position and the livelihood of rural small farmers, helping scaling these sectors also, because low productivity remains a persistent problem in the agricultural space. So I think that is really very timely initiative, and we should see more of those.
So what you're saying is basically, it's good to have the private industry in there, but at the same time, you don't want to leave it all to them. You need the government too, because I think a lot of people are asking, Barry Callebaut, as I said a moment ago, you know, has a lot of money. Why are we paying our taxes to fund this program? He could do it by himself, and Mr. Debenham, I'm sure, could. But so you're saying,
yeah, I think it's really, I think it's really important that both sides are involved. I think, I mean, there is a lot of expectation now on the private sector, right? But the private sector cannot solve all the problems. The DNA of a private company is to make a profit. That's the main responsibility. They're accountable to their shareholders. They're accountable to their employees. So that's, I think, in the first priority they have is to make a profit, and I think that's just fair. But I think we can use them, or we can work together if we frame their activity in a smart way to improve the situation for many people on this planet. There are also certain risks which I think, and it's not only a matter of risk actually, it's also a matter of cost. I don't know the project in detail here, but what I see is, first of all, agricultural is a very sensitive sector, politically also, so I think it's good to have the Swiss government in there. Maybe they have a better access to also the local government, which I hope is also involved in some way and helping.
We're going to talk about that after the next part of the film.
But then I think also there are a lot of costs involved in building those farmers. I mean, at least that's the impression I get. And I understand a private company if they say, well, that's a cost we are ready to bear to a certain extent, but not all of it, because maybe other people will benefit. So it's kind of something like a public good, and I think that's always also a good reason to have the government coming in.
You were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, our partnerships with governments come and donor organisations come as what we perceive to be the catalyser to change. So what we are trying to do is to create a sustainable environment, and by that I mean an environment which will sustain itself once we've had the catalyzing influence. In other words, we start off with what we call sunk costs. In other words, we're never going to recover it. So training of farmers, establishing an environment where farmers are supported by farm services and farm finance so that they can then be professional farmers and use those services to enhance their business, needs to be established, and it takes time and money and risk, and we're prepared to take a significant amount of that risk, but only if we're going to see a sustained environment after that. So sustainable farming in a sustained environment, and it's the first step where we need the support. So the way I describe it is that we could ask everybody in this room to go and run a marathon tomorrow, and I'm sure there's some very fit guys out there, and I'm sure they would probably do very well, but I know I wouldn't do very well. I'd need to go away and train for 6 months before I could run a marathon. What we need to do with our farmers is get them doing that 6 months training so that they're qualified to have farm finance and they're qualified for the farm services, and when they participate in it, they will succeed and become a good customer to the farm finance and the farm services providers, and then you have a self-sustaining environment. So where we need help from government and donors is creating the training of the marathon, so we have great marathon runners who are going to get to the end of the marathon and be healthy at the end of it.
I was just going to go to you,
yeah,
but
yeah,
Susanne Grossmann has to respond.
To add to what Nicko's saying, in the Swiss Investment Fund for Emerging Markets, we also look very closely actually at the agricultural space, and we have some investments already there. You know, we function as a fund of funds, so we invest in fund vehicles that again help small producers or microfinance institutions reach out more to the rural space and agricultural space. It's not possible yet without grant money. So we invest according to commercial principles, but the training, the technical assistance must be donor funded by one or another way, otherwise it's not yet possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to follow up the example with Nicko, with the marathon runner. So after 6 months ready to run a marathon, if you don't train further, you won't be able to run another marathon. So it's about continuous coaching, establish the enabling environment where there is service available for these farmers for continuous lifelong coaching as farmers, as a business, to really grow further their businesses. It doesn't stop with a farmer field school. There it just starts. And in Indonesia alone, we talk about 800,000 to 1 million smallholder cocoa farmers. Currently, we work with 60,000, which is only a fraction of the total numbers we work with. All the different industry players, they have their supply chain focusing on a target market where we help them to grow the programs to finally reach out to 500,000 farmers. So training a farmer for 6 months is just one start. There will be another farmer then in the next 6 months, and another 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. So this is impossible that one single company or even a consortium of private sector partners we work with can deal with this. We need government support, especially local government support, and this we only can achieve when we have international support behind us.
There's one player that's kind of missing for me. You would think that you could go to the banks for money. I mean, in Switzerland, we have a lot of banks, and the way the demand for cocoa is huge. It will get much bigger. And you could just say, why don't they, you know, give loans and finance this? Why aren't they in there in a big way? And I'm going to ask you, because I'm sure you must talk to banks all the time, and you know how they think.
Well, well, I think, I mean, coming to the Swiss banks, I don't think that the farmers are their main clientele here, but
you mean even in Switzerland?
Even in Switzerland. No, and also, I mean, just to give a historical thought, actually, the Swiss cantonal banks, you know, the cantonal bank of Canton of Zurich, but also of the other cantons, they were founded in the 19th century just because of that, because there was no finance for small producers, there was no finance for the agricultural space. So I think, with all our trust today in private banks, we also have to kind of think about our own history. Farmers are not an attractive clientele, I think. They are high risk in, I mean, first of all, the farmers themselves, they have what I hear from our partners, they have quite a skepticism against dealing with banks. Many of them come from communities that have a very difficult social status. So that they don't want to take a loan because they don't know how to repay it. So I think that is the one side, and the other side, it's very high cost. I mean, when we looked at this a little bit at the movie, right? I have been traveling in Tanzania to these cocoa places. It's 6-7 hours on a dirt road, and then the dirt road stops, and then you have to go by foot, or maybe you have a little two-wheeler. And these people live dispersed somewhere there. It's so high cost for a small financial institutions to serve these people. It's small amounts. So I think I have great hope actually in the technology. I think we have some excellent examples how mobile telephony can really bring down those transaction costs. But I think the training will remain a sunk cost, as you mentioned it, and somebody has to bear those costs.
We definitely work together with the local government. We have so far working with 750 local government extension workers together to train all these farmers. But as you can imagine, it's kind of fighting windmills. So every year we train 150 or 200 of them, as we need 200 every year involved in the field schools we're running. And then the next year they are assigned somewhere else, and you start from scratch again with new people, and the other year you have again other people, because those people who trained already work now in rice or other commodities or even move to other villages. So working with the local government in farm extension is very challenging, but we can't do it without them. That's definitely clear. And we mentioned in the last part, we developed this roadmap for Indonesian cocoa sustainability together with the local government. So the CSP Cocoa Sustainability Partnership Roadmap in Indonesia has become the national roadmap for Indonesia as they report to the International Cocoa Organization.
there's an organization here in Switzerland called Erklärung von Bern, and they have a cocoa barometer, which is very enlightening and gives some facts about the cocoa industry. And one of the things they notice is that sons of cocoa farmers don't want to go into cocoa farming. There's just not enough money in it. It's really hard work. There are some other problems with deforestation, palm oil industry, as we saw some. I mean, are you investing in initiatives to actually, you know, I'm coming back to the financing thing, but, you know, if the wage is so bad, the work is so hard, you know, there is going to be a day when they say we just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, so obviously one of our biggest concerns is the succession. So children of cocoa farmers around the world, perhaps in a funny way, less so in Indonesia, but certainly in West Africa, do not want to be cocoa farmers. So this is why we're trying to create this mini economy around farmers to support them to be professional farmers, so that the income that they receive is rewarding, and that the work that they have to put in to receive that rewarding income is acceptable. So one of the core strategies is the farm services, is to try and enable farmers to use services to reduce the labor content while having credit to use inputs, things like crop protection products, fertilizers, so soil fertility management, and also rehabilitation of their farm, so planting material, new planting material to go on their farm. So we do things like creating these small nurseries dotted around the country. We provide the support with all of the access to these different inputs they need on their farm, but also help with vocational training with young people in the villages to become pruners and labor service providers on the farms. Because one of the biggest challenges for cocoa is it's very, very labor intensive. And one of the reasons for having a balanced farm is not just risk management because of fluctuating cocoa prices, etc., but it's also a labor balancing. So you encourage farmers to grow something that is less labor intensive than cocoa, so that they can still get a rewarding income from the alternative crop, but are able to cope with the amount of cocoa that they have on their farm. So we're trying to understand what is the best balanced approach so that somebody can have a good livelihood without having to work in unacceptable levels because of labor requirements of cocoa, but are getting an acceptable income. And therefore, the next generation will consider to be farmers, not just cocoa farmers.
And if you don't succeed, Barry Callebaut is going to make you a cocoa farmer? Because they need
if I
the
don't
cocoa,
succeed,
right?
yeah, I should think I'll be touting around for jobs doing something else.
You're pulling out, the Swiss government is pulling out in 4 years, I think, out of this project. Yeah.
We're planning currently the second phase up to 2020, together also with the Swiss government. And our exit strategy is clearly that we have successful farmer organizations established who take care of their supply chain, down with the farmers in relation with the international market, the multinational companies. And local government plays a big role in our, let's call it, exit strategy, but this is less focused than the private sector. So there is no exit strategy for us as an NGO within this program if the private sector isn't from the beginning fully involved in the program to actually step up in the end and continue the services we help them to establish along the program.
I think I made a mistake just after the film because I was going to ask you for questions. It's probably a little late to do it at this time, so I'm going to try to ask what you might think, because to kind of sum up, and that's always hard to do, but at the radio I don't see you, so I have to kind of guess what kind of questions you might ask. But I think, you know, to pull it together, and I'm going to go back to you, Susanne Grossmann, local government, national government, international governments and private sector. Like, I think it's still not quite clear, and I'm sure for many people it isn't quite why the cooperation or how to get local, national governments, for instance, to jump in, just what Manfred was saying, you know, to jump into the place of we're pulling out, but then basically, you know, it's up to you, you keep doing that or whatever. I don't know, you know, from your experiences, but I think, because I think there is, and we talked about this last night, there's always, I think people distrust when private companies are in there, because there's always the profit thing. Are you really doing good? What you want is cocoa, and no one believes you that you might be, you know, one of the good guys. And I think it's sort of that which stays. And then you think, but the public, you know, the SECO is in here. You're kind of working there, but what exactly are you spending it on? You know, and then where is the local government? How much is there? And then, you know, we could go on and on about corruption, about tax systems, and all this. And I'm basically asking you to, you know, wow, to solve all the problems, or at least, you know, say what we should still do.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think, let me say to start with that I think maybe the most interesting of these goals for me is really, is it 16 or 17? The one where we have the accountability of the governments, where we had a very nice example, at least a starting point in the chart. I hope there will be lots of activities following this declaration, but that is for me, I mean, I've been in development cooperation since the 90s actually. And honestly, really a frustrating experience is very often that, that you feel, you know, you come from the outside and there is a lot of good intent and a lot of help, and there is very little coming from inside. From the local governments. When you work with small companies, you see they really struggle. They have so many problems. It's corruption at all levels. It's not even really the high corruption at the national level, but it's the petty corruption, I would say. You know, inspections, punishments for no reason, and many of them. I recently returned from a travel in Balkans. I have SME promoters telling me they do not want to grow anymore. They're very successful. We would like them to grow more. And they tell me they do not want to grow because they're getting on the radar screen of local politicians. And then there comes all these, you know, open hands. And this is really a very bad situation. And this will not lead to development on the long run, and this will not lead to jobs or more jobs. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to give an example. So I think this one development goal, if we only can achieve this one, there are many other important ones, and I know other people have other priorities, but for me, I think if we can achieve really progress on this one and cut down on corruption, making politicians accountable for their own population and their own private sector, and deliver and build roads, because these are clearly, you know, things that must be done by the government. Then I think we have really taken a big jump.
I think we have our work cut out for us, if that was ever a summary of where we have to go with these goals. I think that was one. Thank you very much for this discussion.